Hello?
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
There you go. How about now? Can you hear me? Yeah, I got you.
Well, I might as well test my mic. Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Great. All right.
I have a quick question. Are you going to be doing a lot of stuff in the chat? I don't have access to the chat, so just curious.
Primarily we're just going to be going through a PowerPoint for the majority of it. Then we'll open up the forum at the end for any questions.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Logan, do you think we're ready to get started?
I think that's probably all right. I'm counting 5 ACP members in the chat, and I think we're expecting maybe 1 or 2 more this evening, but I see we're also recording it, and thank you for that. So for any folks who arrive late, we'll be able to show them back. Oh, and I see at least 1 more member has joined. So yeah, I think we're good to get started. And thank you all again for taking the time to do this for the ACP.
Oh, you're very welcome. Just to give you a quick overview of what we're going to do tonight, we're going to discuss the use of force training and de-escalation training that the police department provides. It's going to be set up like a PowerPoint, so we're going to go through all the PowerPoint presentation. Myself and 2 other instructors will be providing some information to you. If there are any questions, I would just ask you wait till the end. We have a lot of information to get through to you tonight, but I also understand there's probably going to be some questions at the end. So just to get started, I'll introduce myself, and then I'll give a little history of myself, and then I'll introduce our training team for the de-escalation and force training unit. My name is Nate Kunkel. I'm the sergeant of the De-Escalation and Force Training Unit. I am in my 25th year with the police department. I've been involved in training since 2001, and I came to the academy full time last April to serve as a sergeant of this unit. I'm going to turn it over to Officer Rizzo, Dominic Rizzo, who's part of the unit as well. Joey, your mic's not turned on.
There you go. I was going to say, as long as I've taught at the academy, this is the first time I've ever taught anything on Teams. So somehow I've managed to make it so I can't see any of you, just myself. Anyway, I've been an officer since 2003. I worked with the Baltimore County Police for 5 years. Then I lateraled to Montgomery County. I did about 4.5 or 5 years on patrol in Montgomery County, and then I got a position as an instructor at the academy. I've been an academy instructor now for almost 13 years. I think that's about right. I was on our SWAT team for 6 years, and I've taught entry level, in service, and now the use of force unit. And I'm certified instructor in pretty much everything that we teach at the academy except EVOC, emergency vehicle operations.
Officer Latifoff.
Good evening. I'm Rick Latifov. I've been an officer with the department for 16 years. 15 years of that I spent on patrol, 5 years in Silver Spring, 10 years in Gaithersburg. I've been a full-time instructor with this unit for over a year. I'm a taser instructor, pepper ball instructor, use of force instructor. I also spent a lot of time at in-service, during in-service training, teaching the use of force hour block to our sworn officers. I also help our unit teach the recruits the use of force as well. And I'm also an ICAT instructor as well. I believe I got all of those.
All right, thank you. Officer Jennings.
Yeah, good evening, friends. My name is Eric Jennings. I'm with the De-Escalation and Force Training Unit working under Sergeant Kunkel. I've been with Montgomery County for about a little over 12 years now, and actually with this unit for since January. My primary focus is use of force for the recruits and taser instructor, pepper ball, armor, and instructor. And I think that pretty much covers it. Most of us are kind of a jack of all trades as far as the unit goes. So I've been with the unit for a little less than a year, and I've been an adjunct instructor for about 5, and finally got a position on the unit. So thank you.
All right, you guys will also see in the group we have Officer Chris Hendricks, who's currently doing a temporary assignment with our unit. He's primarily assigned to the patrol unit in our Rockville district. All of our instructors are taser instructors, pepper ball instructors, and the majority of our unit are also ICAT de-escalation instructors. And I'll go into a little bit more about what each of those means. Really, the first part, I'm going to give an overview of the responsibilities of our unit. We'll move on to the 2022 use of force law change in Maryland, how it affected our policy. We'll go into some human performance factors. Then the last portion of the presentation will cover our ICAT de-escalation training. So overall, our unit responsibilities is we teach entry-level use of force, and I'll go into these a little bit more in depth. In-service use of force, we teach taser and manage the taser program. We have recently implemented a pepper ball program, which I'll go into a little bit more. We teach ICAT de-escalation. We also manage our department's virtual reality training system. We assist our entry-level team with the reality-based training. We assist the crisis intervention team training, and we handle the majority of the community presentations for the department at the academy. For the entry level, for our recruits, we're directly with them for 80 hours of their training, and that's just us with them. We also assist with various other portions of the entry level training, but 40 hours of that 80 hours we are with them is our use of force training. What we teach in that is civil rights. We talk about the 5 areas of liability and constitutional torts. We cover the Supreme Court use of force case law, which is, as of right now, federally hasn't changed since 1989. We cover the state use of force law, which is Public Safety Act 3-524, which went into effect in 2022. We cover departmental policy when dealing with use of force, which is Function Code 131. We cover human performance factors. And part of what we do are isolation and articulation drills. So we'll run the recruits through scenario-based training, and then we have them break down the training and their response to the stimulus that we give them. Part of it, we'll do case studies where we'll show videos from throughout the nation. We prefer to have the Maryland cases to show. We'll show use of force and its incidents from throughout the United States. We'll break them down, how they would fall under Maryland law, how things could have had a different outcome, had different strategies and tactics been used. The other 40 hours that we spend outside of their classroom, we do a 20-hour TASER course. Part of the TASER course is obviously learning the weapons platform. We do additional reality-based training with them for the TASER portion. And then we integrate ICAT de-escalation training, which we'll discuss a lot more about ICAT here in a minute. So during an entry-level training, our recruits receive approximately 100 hours, or a little over 100 hours of reality-based training. And the reality-based training nationally is known as the best way for anyone to learn. When they rep a situation over and over again, trying to get the best outcome, that's what goes into their long-term memory, and that's what they'll draw from under times of high stress. 40 of those hours are dedicated to conflict management. In the conflict management block, we cover mental health crisis, so how to deal with somebody who's in mental health crisis, and we also talk about civil orders. Another 40 hours is dedicated to patrol procedures, and that's more dealing with criminal activity, more volatile scenes, use of force, the level of encounter we have, whether we have the lawful authority to create a seizure of that individual, and TASER and ICAT. So part of the unit we also teach is in-service, which is part of our continuing education program. Our unit handles a 1-hour block of instruction annually for our in-service. Officers are required to come back 2 days a year for their in-person continuing education program. We do a 1-hour block. We'll cover use of force stats from the previous year. We usually do a video analysis of a use of force interest, and we'll talk about whether there was a governmental interest, a personal interest, and try to delineate the difference. We spend a lot of time speaking about reasonable alternatives. So obviously, when we're reviewing use of force incidents, there's force that's being used. So we talk about what other ways could we have handled that call reasonably to make a safer outcome. We talk about the necessity and proportionality of the law, of the use of force, which falls under the Maryland law. And we talk about how officers can better articulate and document that use of force, obviously creating a better situation for everyone, so everyone knows why there was a level of force. We cover the duty to intervene. It's been a big push over the past few years to really push the duty to intervene. When you see an officer who you think might be making a mistake, to do what's right, step up, step in, separate that officer from that situation, and try to bring down that situation to a much more manageable level. And then we'll review any new case law or any new policies that have come out. Part of what we do for our continuing education is we manage our TASER program. Currently, we have approximately 550 officers who are issued TASERs. By the middle of next year, that number will rise to approximately 750. The county and the police department entered into agreement that all forward-facing uniformed officers will have a TASER issued to them, and we're currently working through that. We're hosting 2 to 3 trainings a month to try to get all the mandated officers through that training, and we're hoping by the middle of next year that will be complete. Our taser course is a 20-hour course, which is double what Axon, who manufactures tasers, mandates. We like to incorporate a lot more reality-based training. As I said before, reality-based training is the best training we can give our officers. Recently, we started a pepper ball program, and if you look at the bottom right of that PowerPoint slide, you can see what a pepper ball launcher looks like. It is the easiest way to describe it is like a paintball gun or a paintball launcher. But instead of launching paintballs, it launches a powdered substance that has a similar effect to what a pepper spray would have. The vital difference is we can address these threats from distances of 60 plus feet on direct impact, and then there's other ways we can deploy it up to 150 feet. This gives that officer that distance from the subject, which creates less immediacy to that threat. It's something new. We just really started to implement the program and get the launchers on the road in the past month. We currently have 32 launchers that are on the road. By next month, we'll add an additional 13. So we will have a complement of 45 patrol officers who are equipped with this less lethal technology. We are hoping to expand this program. This program is brand new. We're hoping to expand it to over 200 launchers in the future. We're working, trying to find some funding sources to be able to make that happen. But we've already had great feedback from it. We had a gentleman who was a call for service. I can't get into too much detail, but he was threatening others, saying he was armed with a firearm. Officers responded. He had his hands hidden underneath the poncho, saying he had a gun. He looked up, saw the pepper ball launcher, and he gave up. So it was a good use. It was a good de-escalation just by that presence of that force option. And obviously, it could have had much more tragic outcomes had he not given up, because he was threatening to have a gun and he kept reaching for his waistband underneath the poncho. So it's a good less lethal force option. Again, that we're hoping to expand over the next several years. Our unit also assists our crisis intervention team with the crisis intervention team training. This is a mandatory training for all officers that are on the road. And again, we're working through that seniority list. And I believe at this point, we're less than 150 officers on the department that still need to receive this training. This is a 40-hour block of instruction, which really teaches people how to help people who are in mental health crisis. Primary instructions handled by our CIT instructions, or our CIT instructors, then we assist with some of the portions. We're going to go a little bit more in depth into ICAT, but just a quick overview. ICAT is our de-escalation training. It was created by the Police Executive Research Forum in 2015, and our department has adopted it as its de-escalation strategy that we teach. This is another 20-hour block of instruction. It's broken into 7 modules. We'll go more in depth into what those modules are individually, but you can see them there on the screen. I said earlier that we handle the virtual reality training. Virtual reality training, there's a couple different ways that it gets used. Number one, it's used in taser training. It allows our officers to be much more effective with the taser, therefore using a lower level of force consistently. We also use it in CIT training because there are several scenario-based learning environments in the virtual reality headset that allow officers to see what people are going through who are actually in mental health crisis. Officers are forced to make a decision on how they're going to handle each person, and depending on those officers' choices, it'll tell them whether they're doing it correctly or not. And that is a huge de-escalation training that really is just starting in its infancy. We're looking for the virtual reality training program, which we have at our department, to expand over the next year. The manufacturer of the training system said that they're going to continue to push out additional virtual reality-based trainings over the next year. So I'm going to turn it over to Officer Rizzo, who's going to handle the change in law, human performance factors.
All right. So 2022, they passed Maryland Public Safety Article 3524. Nate, you can just flip it. basically this law was passed in response to a couple of nationwide incidents, and the the thing about police policy is that the departments can determine what policy they want and how they want to write it and how they want to implement their policy. So when the public desires it, laws can be passed to force change on a department, whether it's for the good or for the bad of the department or the people, but they can mandate the change. So this law is a result of that, and actually think that the results of this law are beneficial for everybody. I'm just going to read the words. You can see it right there on the screen. But it states that an officer may not use force against a person unless, under the totality of the circumstances, the force is necessary and proportional to prevent an imminent threat of physical injury to a person or to effectuate a legitimate law enforcement objective. Goes on to say that a police officer shall cease the use of force as soon as the person is under the officer's control or no longer poses an imminent threat of physical injury or death to the police officer or another person, or the police officer determines that the force will no longer accomplish a legitimate law enforcement objective. So it then goes on to say that an officer may not intentionally violate the above, resulting in serious physical injury or death. If so, then that officer may be subject to being charged with a 10-year misdemeanor, 10-year being the penalty for it. So you will see as I go through this law, when we get into Function Code 131, our policy directly reflects this law. Okay. The law goes on to mandate that when time, circumstance, and safety allow, you'll take steps to gain compliance and de-escalate the conflict without using physical force. It also states that you will intervene to prevent or terminate the use of force by another officer beyond what is authorized in this law and in policy. And then it says you will render first aid and promptly request appropriate medical assistance. And then you will fully document all use of force incidents that the officer was observed or was involved in. So whether the officer just observed it and didn't take any action or wasn't actually involved in the incident, or if they were involved in it, they also need to document. The law mandates some training. It says that an officer shall undergo training on when they may or may not draw a firearm, point a firearm at a person, and also training for options that are less likely to cause death or serious physical injury, including scenario-based training, de-escalation tactics and techniques, and reasonable alternatives to decrease physical injury. So you'll notice that those three things there are covered in multiple places in the blocks of instruction that Nate went over. Go ahead. Okay, so this is Function Code 131. This is our response to resistance, okay, and use of force. It states that officers may only use force when, under the totality of the circumstance, it's necessary and proportional to prevent an imminent threat of physical injury to a person or to effectuate a legitimate law enforcement objective. Then it also says this authority is limited by the applicable laws of Montgomery County, State of Maryland, federal law, the United States Constitution, and the policy. Our policy defines the use of force as any intentional use of any weapon, instrument, device, means, or physical efforts by a law enforcement other than compliant handcuffing or unresisted escorting in response to the action or inaction of an individual in order to gain control, restrain, or overcome the resistance of an individual to gain compliance, control, or custody of that person. So basically, if anybody, say an officer notifies somebody that they're under arrest, if that person turns around, puts their hands behind their back, and then the officer just reaches up, takes custody of their hands, and applies the handcuffs, that's unresisted handcuffing. It's compliant handcuffing. So that's not a use of force. And then also unresisted escorting. So if I'm like, come with me, and like I just, gesture, put my hand on someone's back and walk, and they move with me, that's not considered a use of force. Anything other than that is a use of force. Okay, the policy defines necessary when we're talking about uses of force. Force is necessary only if the officer has no other reasonable alternative under the totality of the circumstance to prevent imminent physical harm or accomplish another legitimate law enforcement objective. When force is necessary, the use of force shall be used in a manner that avoids unnecessary injury or risk to all persons involved. Okay. So you can see there, necessary, you have to take the totality of circumstances. So everything you know up to that incident, right, and including what's going on in that incident, you have to assess it and determine, do I need to use force? And then the next one is proportional. So that'll be how much force. And then if you need to use force, are there reasonable alternatives that you can try prior to using the force? So to do all of those things to meet the definition of necessary. Proportionality, it refers to the degree and amount of force that corresponds to and is appropriate in relation to the level of resistance or aggression facing the officer or the objective that the officer is attempting to accomplish. So you combine these two things together to make the standard for the state of Maryland, which is set by the use of force law, which is that force must be necessary and proportional given the totality of the circumstance. So you need to meet the criteria for necessary, and then the proportionality is what level of force you choose to use based on your aggression or resistance, and then totality of circumstance, mentioned that earlier, that's all credible facts known to the law enforcement officer leading up to and at the time of the use of force, including the actions of the person against whom the law enforcement officer uses such force and the actions of the law enforcement. All of these things combined together to make the standard by which our force is judged. So take everything you know, and based on that, do I need to use force to accomplish this goal? If there are reasonable alternatives that work and I have time, I would like to try those first. Then if those aren't going to work, yes, you need to use force. So then you talk about how much force, which is the proportionality. Let's go on to the next slide. 131, section 3H says that officers shall cease the use of force as soon as a person on whom the force is used is under the officer's control, no longer poses an imminent threat of physical injury or death to an officer or to another person, or the officers determine that the force will no longer accomplish a legitimate law enforcement objective. That's basically word for word what the state law says. Firearms. So there's basically 3 levels. We're talking about drawing firearms, pointing firearms, and then deploying deadly force. This is a standard that's set by the department to meet the law where it says you should undergo training, shall undergo training of when you can draw. So firearms may be drawn whenever an officer reasonably fears for their safety, for the safety of others. It's a pretty low level, and it takes a little bit of articulation of why the situation is unsafe. You need to be authorized to remove handgun or any other firearm you might be carrying, like you had a rifle or a shotgun. Sorry, I was going to go to the second back. Thanks. It also says that you shall only point firearm at an individual when circumstances create a reasonable belief that it may be immediately necessary. So, first one is a lower threshold. Second one is a higher threshold. At some point, we have a high standard for deadly force. Right. Getting into constitutional stuff. So Graham versus Connor, 1989, that basically set a standard. There we go. Basically set a standard. So it states that in its calculus must make split seconds necessary. There's another.
Hey, Joey, I'm not sure if you can hear me or not, but your microphone's cutting in and out. So I'm not sure. We'll just move on and continue.
Yeah, I have it unmuted, and I'm the only one in the room, so I don't.
Okay,
Or maybe it's just my connection from the house.
it could be.
The Graham standard, which is a standard set by the Graham versus Connor case, states that your use of force must be objectively reasonable from the perspective of a reasonable officer at the moment force was used without the benefit of hindsight 2020. So to make that decision, we analyze something called the SURF factors: the severity of the crime, the immediacy of the threat, the presence of resistance or flight, or any or all of those. Okay. The Maryland Attorney General, though we're moving, Maryland Attorney General's opinion. So when the law changed for 524, the colonel from the Maryland State Police sent a letter to the Maryland Attorney General's office asking for a definition of necessary and proportional, like a legal definition. And the Attorney General wrote a response that was approximately 34 pages long. Some of the things that he stated here is that the standard cannot be reduced to a formula. It's not amenable to a precise definition, as it necessarily depends on the specific circumstances encountered by the officer on scene. Basically, what he's trying to say is that every situation is different, and you have to apply your standard to the use of force based on the facts known to the officer at the time when he made his decision. He also talked about the fact that articulation is extremely important, that now more than ever, officers need to document in detail what they did, why they did it, meaning their observations and what they knew that led them come to the conclusion to use force. We go on further to state that officers need to be able to explain why they did what they did, but also why they chose not to do other things. That's pretty big in our training. The standard that the Maryland law set is different than the Graham standard. It's actually more strict. You can always have a standard more strict than a federal Supreme Court decision, but you cannot have one that is less restrictive. The new standard requires consideration of other means, reasonable alternatives that we talked about, that would allow you to achieve the same ends given those same totality of circumstances. It states that you may not, or that the force must be no more than the situation reasonably requires. And the biggest difference that everyone agrees upon is that the federal standard states specifically at the moment force was used. So when they analyze your force, it really narrowed down a very specific point in time. Maryland law says totality of circumstances in it, and the Attorney General states that. So that expands it out to anything and everything that the officer knew about that situation. If I encountered somebody the day before and I dealt with them, and then I encounter them today, something I know from yesterday could be used to assess my use of force today. That's the largest difference between the standards. We do our best to try to really hammer home articulation and reasonable alternatives, really being able to explain to yourself, what do you see? What are you reacting to? What do I need to use force? How much force? And then when do I terminate that force? All that training is based on those things. Just breaking down the standard here, your force has to be necessary and proportional under totality of circumstances without the benefit of hindsight 2020. The Graham standard was just objectively reasonable at the moment force was used without the benefit of hindsight 2020. So this is just a little visual representation here. It is possible to use force as an officer and land somewhere in the blue circle, blue ring, right? Meaning you're well within the Graham standard on a federal level, Supreme Court level. You used objectively reasonable force that could be deemed or would be deemed reasonable force, not excessive force. But you were outside of Maryland's law. So you could have used force that was considered excessive in Maryland, but not excessive by a Graham standard. Okay. Human performance wise, and we're really moving along. This is like a 40-hour block of instruction boiled down into a handful of slides here. Right, go ahead. So we train officers basically what their body is going to do with levels of stress. I think, yeah. We talk about selective attention, what was also called tunnel vision, where that's actually a response, like it's an instinctual response from when we were being chased by big predators, right? Something happens and you hyper focus, you only see that threat. So we talk about selective attention and ways to break it. That little image actually is supposed to work the other way, where first you only see the guy with the gun and then comes up and then you see the whole picture to demonstrate tunnel vision. Yeah, more like that. Okay. Auditory exclusion, and that is the most common of human performance issue. So under high stress, you can actually use your hearing partially. So it's sort of like somebody turns the volume down. It's very easy under high stress situations not to hear sirens, not to hear gunshots, not to hear people speaking, things like that. These are all physiological responses to stress. So this is a good video that shows two highly trained, high performance Major League Baseball players. They are both focusing on this ball if it plays. They have tunnel vision on the ball to the point where they don't see each other in the field running to catch the ball. That's an example of tunnel vision. They were highly focused on the ball, on their objective, so they didn't see anything else, and they ran into each other. That happens all the time. And it's actually interesting. Law enforcement, there's a high correlation with professional sports, because professional sports train so much for physical things and their bodies react to stress in the professional sports world the same way as officers' bodies react to stress in a policing situation. And one of the reasons physical fitness training is so important in the academy. This slide right here, it shows a chart that basically says there's an area of opportunity. So if you look at a bell curve, under a moderate amount of pressure or stress, achieve the opportunity. If stress is too low, there's actually another version of this where it actually says arousal, like mental arousal. So your arousal will become so low that you're actually sleepy, or that's like someone sitting in class listening to someone throw. Then you can go up where the pressure is so high that the stress outpaces stress. Selective attention, auditory exclusion. There's another one. It's time to actually see things happening in slow motion. Faster. We do a lot of reality-based training. In fact, something actually put students.
Joey, I think your mic's cutting out again, so we'll give it a shot again. But If not, I can just hop in if you would rather.
Yours is working fine. Is that because you're on our network?
Yeah, I'm on the network at the academy. So, all right, next we're going to talk about perception reaction time. So, under that human performance factor, how quickly can the body intake information, process that information, and then make an action on it? So, on average, for a human who's 100% in performance, it takes 0.25 to 0.3 seconds for them to perceive a change in their environment. That's just for them to have the ability to intake that there is a change in the environment. Once they intake that, it takes approximately 1 to 3 seconds for them to either stop an action or to make a change in their behavior based upon what the brain has taken in. So why is this important? It's obviously important for us to train. So we train over and over again. Physical training, as Officer Rizzo said, will help establish the automaticity of movement. So we talked earlier about those reality-based training venues and what we do in reality-based training and how that helps us. And this is one of the reasons. This is a expiring skill set as well. So it's something that we have to continue to train over and over again every year. And that will allow us to stay proficient in doing this. So the example here is the typing. If we don't type anything for a year and we were a really good typist to begin with, that speed is going to diminish rapidly. That's why every day, I know I'm on my computer most of the day typing, and my skill set has gotten much better. But if I went away from this for a year, my proficiency would drastically decrease. You also have to mentally rep things. And interestingly enough, the Blue Angels, there's a great video of them where they mentally and physically rep their air performances in a classroom setting with their eyes closed. So they'll just listen to what the commander tells them and the orders that they get over the radio. And they'll sit there and you'll see them actually move the stick, move their feet like they're making adjustments to their plane. So that's that mental repping. And officers we teach them to mentally rep on their way to calls, or even what they're going to do once they get there. So personally, I know from my past, every time I would run any type of call, let's say it was a domestic violence, I would think about the tactics. If I get there and this happens, this is my next course of action, or this, and I would rep. Okay, what are the laws about domestic violence, and do that over and over again. It makes the calls a little bit easier to deal with. So we talk about automaticity, and we do it in a lot of areas in our lives. When we do things automatically, it frees up. It frees up your frontal lobe so you can actually do some logical thinking. The easiest example of this is a green light. We don't have to think when we're sitting in a green light. What do I have to do? It's automatic. Our bodies automatically know. They see the green, they're just going to push the gas once they make sure the intersection is clear and go through. Same thing with the yellow light. What you should do is slow down to come to a stop, but obviously there's a lot of people who put the pedal to the floor and try to get through that before it turns red. And then the red light. These are things that we automatically do that we don't have to think about while we're doing them. Same thing on a car. You're pulling up to a light and you see the brake lights come on. We don't have to think about what we're doing. Our foot automatically moves over to that brake, and we begin to apply pressure to it. So this is kind of the things that if we train over and over again and we have those reality-based trainings, this is what allows officers to react appropriately to these type of situations. So next we're going to cover our de-escalation and our ICAT training, which is the department's de-escalation training. ICAT stands for integrating communication, assessment, and tactics. And I'm going to bring on Officer Latifov, who will cover this subject area.
Good morning, everybody. As Sergeant Kunkel mentioned, it does stand for Integrated Communications, Assessment, and Tactics. The basic goal of this training is to provide officers with options whenever they're dealing with various situations. The basic goal, the primary goal here is de-escalation. This it's important to note that this training focuses on incidents where a subject is not armed with a gun. So proximity weapon, knife, baseball bat. It also looks at incidents where somebody's not armed. If somebody's maybe going through a crisis, so you don't necessarily need to have a crime. The police go in there, they arrest somebody and take somebody to jail. No, this could be somebody who is having a bad day, having a domestic, or somebody who's going through a mental crisis. So there are these um, incidents that are starting. This was implemented by PERF, which stands for Police Executive Research Forum, and they were founded in 1976. And the body consists of police professionals, retired, civilians, everything from federal, state, and local. And they've been providing a lot of research, analyzing that research, implementing training to executive staff also across the nation over all these years. And one of these things which was created was ICAT. And this was around, as Sergeant Kunkel said, it was in 2015. Just prior to that, 2014 is when a lot of there was a big police climate change. There was a lot of police reform, still to this day. And around that time, PERP was in Scotland, and Scotland has significantly less amount of guns. Therefore, their police officers are also unarmed. The question came up during that meeting to the Scotland police is like, hey, how do you guys, how many calls do you get when you get, when there's a knife involved? And they said some insane number. And the next question was, how do these police officers and suspects don't get injured as much given the circumstances of the situation? And the response was, well, we slow the situation down when we can. We try to talk to the individual and see if they can do what we want them to do. For instance, putting the knife down. And PERF at this point recognized that, hey, we're actually utilizing these tactics here in the United States from SWAT and negotiators. So they came back to the United States and they took the tactics that SWAT utilizes and negotiators utilize and package it in this training, which is the ICAT training, and they bring it to the patrol level. So your common patrol officer, whenever you call 911 and that police officer at the door shows up, those are the officers that this training is primarily designed for. And again, the goal is to lay out as many options for that officer as possible so that officer can recognize, do I have the ability to slow the situation down? If I have the ability to slow the situation down, what resources can I use? Can I get other officers over here? Am I establishing a good rapport with the individual that I'm dealing with? Crisis recognition and so on. So if you go on to the next slide, we'll talk about the, I believe there's a video, so I'll stop talking for this one.
I've got no audio for the video.
I was about to say the same. Yeah, what if you unmute your mic, see if it works that way?
Yeah, let me see if I can get that to work. It did work earlier, but we'll give it a shot.
I got nothing on my end.
All right.
I think there's usually an option when you share the screen initially to check a box that says like share the computer audio. I don't know if you would want to try to end the share and maybe reshare and see if that's available.
Okay, we'll give that a shot.
I saw this man walking up and down the street.
Someone takes out a knife.
He looked,
Is there audio now?
disgruntled.
You pull out your gun, tell him to drop it.
He's wearing a black
Yeah, I could hear it.
Okay.
sweatshirt and some cargo pants.
And that's all of these situations. If you're going to change and deal with use of force, you have to change how they're trained, because in every instance, every time I'm called by a reporter, why did the police officer do what he or she did? I said, it's very simple. They did what their training told them to do. I said, this is really about negotiation, slowing things down, time and distance. When you're right on top of someone, you have less degrees of freedom. When you're back behind and you have cover and you're communicating and you have, that's a lot different.
All I want is the unemployment paper signed. That's all I want.
Welcome to the National ICAT Center.
I hate my brother.
He's armed with a bat.
Right. The distance, thinking about that.
What we want to do is tell a story.
I got something going on. I got my brother calling the cops on me. No good reason whatsoever.
It goes back to around 2015, 2014, and there was a lot going on in the country then. People started questioning police use of force. I happen to be in Scotland because they don't have firearms in the United Kingdom. I thought to myself, well, how do they deal with situations with non-firearms, with knives, bricks, and 2x4s?
I was fortunate enough to be one of the 25 police chiefs that Chuck Wexler invited to Scotland to see how does a police department that doesn't carry firearms deal with mentally ill people with edged weapons, bats, bricks, petrol bombs, and how is it that nobody gets shot dead? Where in America, maybe 40% or more of our shootings, we shoot people with edged weapons.
So how long have you been at the bank?
This facility is about tactics, communication, and training.
What's going on there?
So these are taking principles that SWAT teams have used for years successfully and applied them to patrol.
If a person is in crisis, you should start from the same point. You should start, I'm going to save this. I'm going to solve this problem, and we're all going to walk away from it.
We have a phone. We can get you in contact with your mom.
All right, look, is the ambulance coming? Because I'm sorry.
Please just leave me alone. I came here to be alone. How many are there?
At the end of the day, it's not just me wanting to go home safe, because that's an ideology of the past. But the reality is we want everyone in that situation, to include the citizens, to go home safely.
And that's what ICAT is about. You take the time, you keep the distance, and you communicate.
You with my officer here, and I go talk to your boss, okay?
Here.
Not only do you come in here and learn tactics and practice scenarios, you have to have and develop attitude that helps you deal with a person in crisis much differently than what we've done in the last 30 years.
We would see officer-involved shootings, and as the officer has their gun out and the person has a knife, the cop is yelling, drop it, drop it, drop it.
Drop it.
The person walking toward him with the knife is saying, shoot me, shoot me, shoot me.
In that video, the first thing the officer does is draw his weapon. So he's escalated the situation.
The only way to look at that from a psychological standpoint is that person, for whatever reasons, wanted the cop to shoot them.
That comes down to training, and it comes down to the culture of your department or your sheriff's office.
To me, the most powerful video in the curriculum.
We actually use footage in ICAT training. That's what makes it so real. We actually show what happened.
I'm gonna do like a helicopter, like this. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that.
ICAT training is available to any law enforcement agency in the country.
Another thing that you see here is
at no cost in 2023. If you provide transportation and hotel stay in Decatur, Illinois, we will take care of the cost of the training. A brand new multi-million-dollar state-of-the-art facility where your officers will get intense classroom instruction and, most important, live scenario venues.
One of the things I took home from Scotland was the sanctity of human life. That is the first line in our use of force policy, the sanctity of human life. What we've seen in Volusia County is a drastic reduction in use of force and in deadly force. Reduction of probably 60% of injuries to deputies, injuries to suspects, reduction in complaints against police, reduction in crime, and great improvement on the way we solve crime.
The change over time has been amazing in terms of our uses of force, police-involved shootings, and that has come from change in training and the learning that we instituted from ICAT.
The culture of the organization is when time, distance, and cover allow for itself, you have to use it.
This is one of those learnings that we can all take something from and improve ourselves and add to the positive change in law enforcement, something that we're seeing in Baltimore.
The proof is that where this was implemented, you reduced overall use of force, you reduced injuries to the subjects you were dealing with. The most surprising finding was you reduced injuries to officers at a higher percentage than anything.
Not only do I have 20 people here, I have lieutenant colonels, I have several majors, I have captains, lieutenants down to sergeant. It's so important because the buy-in has to start at the top. Leadership makes culture. Training gets culture into the community.
I've spent 30 years working around the world through our foundation, seeing a lot of bad things. People can react, either match the violence or try to back away from the violence and de-escalate it. And every time you de-escalate something, you end up with a better result.
And now he has built a state-of-the-art multi-million-dollar facility where if you come, we will provide the training free.
We'll never charge a penny to use this facility. I think officers are understanding, and the leadership and police departments and sheriff's offices, we have to bring everybody to a higher level.
All right. So one thing I will note about that video real quick, that facility, I had the pleasure of going to that one with Sergeant Kunkel as well. I'm sure he'll agree with me. It was an incredible facility. Just the size of it and the ability for them to take this reality-based training scenarios and really make you feel like you're there on that scene, on that corner, that street, or in that shopping center, or they have a medical facility, offices, all sorts of stuff. And the other thing I want to point out is the role players. The role players are excellent. They really are on a very specific script, and they definitely contribute to the reality aspect of that training. And I think I certainly, whenever I go through that kind of training, I get a lot out of it as well. As far as implementation goes for our department, there's approximately 150. I'm sorry, there are approximately 150 officers that are currently ICAT trained. We also every entry level, every recruit class, not just this year, but correct me if I'm wrong, Sergeant. I think the last 3 classes have gotten this ICAT training as well, and it's going to continue on with every class. This current class is also be getting that training as well. We offer this training to sworn officers as well, so the catalog and elective course is available, and we certainly would like to expand this because there's a tremendous amount of value in this, in not just my personal opinion, but as far as the emphasis on de-escalation and having a peaceful resolution. As far as this training goes and the strategies that they are using. If you go to the next slide, this ICAT training is broken down into 7 modules, and each module kind of looks at a very specific aspect of these de-escalation strategies, and I'll briefly go over those really quickly. And it's classroom based, and then after classroom, it is heavy on scenarios. Every officer goes through the scenarios, and the thing that we've in Montgomery County added to on top of our ICAT and kind of incorporate is the articulation aspect at the end, and I'll go over that as well. If you go to that first module, the first one is the introduction to the whole thing. It basically talks about perf, some of the things that were mentioned in that video as well, how they came up with the idea, taking the tactics that SWAT utilizes and negotiators utilize. And a lot of times when we say SWAT, people thinking oh, just a bunch of guys and girls dressed up in gear, kicking the door down and going in, shooting, and then asking questions. That's not the case at all. 15 years that I've done this job, I've been to many SWAT callouts. Officer Rizzo can attest to this. He's been on our SWAT unit. It's a very slow and careful process when SWAT get there. And they explore their options. They say, hey, does this guy barricaded in the house have a phone? Can we call him? Can we see before we do anything if he's even willing to come out? And those are the kind of different strategies that we want to incorporate or are incorporated in this training, and we bring it to a patrol officer. So if they are dealing with a situation where somebody's under a crisis, can that officer recognize, can he or she slow that situation down and recognize what options they have to resolve this problem in the most peaceful manner possible? So that's the introduction, essentially. If you go on to the next model, Sarge, this is the core of ICAT, and it's called there's something called the critical decision making model, or CDM. If you actually go to the next slide, it'll be a good example of that. So the CDM is basically kind of these stepping stones, but it's not necessarily in a very linear manner. All of these things happen at once. So for example, when a police officer gets a call, the police officer is learning information about the call, where it is, who's there, what are they doing. So that's the kind of the collection of that information that you see on top. And before I go any further, I do need to mention that the very center is certainly the core. It's that sanctity of life, the mission statement of the police department. Basically, why are we the police to begin with? We're there to preserve life. We're there to resolve situation in the most peaceful manner possible if those options are presented to us. So from collection gathering, the officer also, based on that information, assesses the threat. The supervisor monitoring the radio also assesses that threat, says, hey, maybe we need to send more officers. Or in some instances, if there's really no reason for the police to be there at all, they'll say, all right, this is not a police matter. For instance, landlord-tenant disputes is a common one that we deal with in Montgomery County, where nobody's arguing, nobody's fighting. There's simply a disagreement over pay or something, or in some instance like that. It's essentially a civil thing. And in our courts, we have a landlord-tenant department. The question is asked, do the police officers need to go there and potentially escalate that situation? Now, unless it's turning into a heated argument, then certainly the police may need to respond. But if it's one of those instances where, hey, we were just disagreeing and we decided to call the police, we didn't know what else to do. There are instances like this. So assessing that threat level is a big part of the CDM as well. And again, it's not a linear process. It all happens at once. The next one that I want to point out is that considering police powers and agency policies at the bottom right. This is very crucial. I think younger officers, when they come out of the academy, they are bombarded with law, constitutional law, policies, regulations, directives, and all these things. It's one thing to sit in the classroom and study these things, but when you actually go out there in field training, and my unit will certainly agree with me, and if they can remember when they went through field training, once you start going and actually physically running these calls, it takes time for you to develop that skill as well, and also recognize what are the laws, what are the policies, and it's crucial to know what those things are. Officer Rizzo just talked about our new use of force law in Maryland. It's very important to know that law, because if the officer doesn't understand when he or she can use force, then that also creates a bigger situation, a critical situation as well. So from that portion where the officer can look and say, hey, I have option this, I can do this, I can do that, I do have an arrest, I don't. The next one is that identity of which option is the best. Which option can I pick right now that will cure this obstacle for me in the most peaceful way possible? And if that doesn't work, do I have a plan B? Do I have a plan C? Very important, and it's certainly in the time that I've done police work, is when you go to any call and you're only focused on that one plan, and we're going to do this, and I'm not really worried about anything else, and this will work. When that thing doesn't work and you don't have a backup plan, things begin to deteriorate, and then you're going from a whatever crisis you had at that time to a bigger crisis. So it's important to recognize what is the best option in that sense, and then also have a backup plan for those, one or two backup plans for that as well. And the final one, certainly not least, is act, review, and reassess. After all these things, I've provided this action. I decided to do this, and you need to reassess and reevaluate. Is this working? Do I need to try something else? And then you go reassess the threat level. If the problem's resolved, then great, you've solved the problem. If you haven't, what other options can I utilize to resolve this problem? So that's basically, and that's kind of the core of it. I think that module takes the longest time to go over and explain. Sarge, if you want to go to the next slide. And that's the crisis recognition. Uh-oh, we got an error. Yeah, there we go. So crisis recognition is an interesting one. When officers arrive on scene, it's important to say that we cannot diagnose a problem, and that's not our job. But it is beneficial to go on scene and recognize if somebody's going through some type of crisis, if somebody's going through some type of manic episode, or their experience, maybe their schizophrenia is really, really bad on that day. And it's not necessarily we need to rush into that room and arrest them and they committed a crime. No, sometimes a crime doesn't happen and the person's just having some type of crisis. And what can we do to cure this problem, or at least get this person the help that they need? For instance, emergency evaluation petitions, taking a person into custody, taking them to the hospital where they can see a doctor is a good example of that. So that module really focuses on just not just, and it's not just individuals with mental illness, somebody who just found out that their wife was cheating on them, or somebody, a family member who just lost a death in the family. Those are tremendous events, very difficult events, and sometimes they generate calls to the police because individuals sometimes really don't know what to do. And you can imagine if somebody's alone and doesn't have any family at all, or they feel suicidal. So in those instances right there, that's what this module really focuses on. We'll go on to the next one. This is the tactical communications. This is more of the options that I was talking about. So for instance, if an officer gets on scene and they have a particular problem, and they, especially if there are multiple officers on scene, you don't want to find an instance where, and I'm sure we've seen videos of this, where officers arrive on scene and there's 5 or 10 officers and every single officer is yelling commands at this individual, overwhelming them, and again, kind of escalating that crisis as well. This is an instance where officers kind of recognize, hey, officer such and such has a really good rapport with this person. Let that officer be the only one who's communicating with this person. They're actually establishing chemistry and maybe potentially can de-escalate the situation. Meanwhile, other officers are getting on their radios, getting more resources there, whether it's SWAT, whether we need more, whether we need to get a drone up in the air containing the situation, negotiators, the social crisis workers, and so on and so on. So this is more just like the tactical approach and recognizing what options I have and how can I utilize these options in this instance as well. So module 5 is an interesting one also. It talks about suicide by cop, and there are many different examples of that. 2 which I want to point out. One is the spontaneous suicide by cop, where there's an incident happening and the person all of a sudden spontaneously realizes that, oh, I did want to commit suicide and this is my opportunity. The police is here. If I present them with this type of force, whether it's a knife or a blunt object, they will shoot me. And then there are certainly instances where somebody actually plans it. The video that you saw, there were little snippets of it. It's an incredible video of a teenage girl who actually, I think it was in California, thought out her entire process of how she's going to call the police. She's going to have a knife on her. And then when the police officer gets there, she's going to confront this officer with a knife and he will shoot her. That officer spent so much time backing away and trying to get this girl to put the knife down. Unfortunately, there was a point where the girl charged the officer and he did shoot her. The fortunate part of it, she survived and actually told the story about it. And then he also narrates the video in it. And they had a reunion where they both met and talked about the whole situation. A very powerful video, and there are good examples in this module in particular about instances where it's suicide by cop and kind of different presentation of it where the officers can under that CDM collect that information and see, hey, this seems like a suicide by cop in instance. How do we approach the situation in this instance as well? Can we slow the situation down? Module 6 takes all of these modules and all these options and kind of puts it all together, and then you pretty much start coming up with strategies of how you would address whatever issue it is or whatever obstacle it is on a call, working as a team together on an incident, good communication, resources, and so on and so on. Just kind of wrapping everything up and then taking that and having an overall strategy to apply when you go dealing with these situations as well. And then last but not least is module 7, which is step up and step in. This covers two main things, one of which in an instance where if there's chaos on scene, some tremendous event, and you have a bunch of officers and it's very disorganized. The concept of stepping up and stepping in is a lot of times is that sergeant, the supervisor figure who shows up, and they kind of say, all right, everybody calm down, let's start assigning roles, and there are basic strategies in regards to that. But you don't necessarily have to be a sergeant, and that's what ICAT kind of reinforces. You could be a rookie fresh out of academy, and if you see a breakdown in communication or in the overall operation of whatever it is, that officer can step up and say, hey, why don't we start organizing this? Why don't we start assigning roles and approach this in a constructive, strategic manner? And the other important thing under step up and step in is the duty to intervene. Unfortunately, we've seen plenty of examples of where officers use excessive force. Some instances, unfortunately, there are opportunities for other officers to step in and to prevent excessive use of force. And this step up and step in kind of focuses on that as well. If I see Sergeant Kunkel, for example, getting amped up on a call and he's losing his temper just because I don't have his rank and he has seniority over me doesn't mean that I can't step in and de-escalate the situation with another officer. As awkward as it may be, these things are helpful, and that's what this module focuses on, and we can certainly go into that a lot more. And finally, after the whole classroom settings over, we do have 13 reality-based training scenarios. We have role players, we have props, and these often our students go through these scenarios either by themselves, and then the second half of it they go in pairs. The benefit in the way we do it in Montgomery County is there's a scenario manager, there's a student, there's the role player. We run the scenario, and if it kind of goes off rails, the scenario manager can step in, say timeout, and coach that officer through that scenario. The other tremendous benefit to the way we do it here is we also, after the scenario is over, we'll walk over to the side and we'll start going over articulation. We'll talk about, hey, what did you have? And the officer starts talking about what they had. And what did this person do? What did they pull? Well, they pulled a knife. What did you decide to do? And they pretty much find a very constructive and chronological way of articulating their use of force or their de-escalation methods. And I think it's tremendously beneficial for recruits in academy as well, because you'll go from the first scenario where they have a very difficult time articulating anything because they're new to this, they've never done this before, and by the time they get to that last scenario, they're very specifically in a very particular detail explaining and articulating the entire event that unfolded in front of them in those scenarios. I believe I covered everything that I could under ICAT, so thank you.
Yeah, great job. Next, we're going to open it up for any questions that you guys may have. I'm going to ask my team, everybody, to jump back on. If you guys have any specific questions, you're more than welcome to ask them now. I also will put contact information on for myself and my entire team. So if there's any questions in the future, you guys will have our contact information for anything that you may need. So I'll open the floor if anybody has anything now.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. Hi, my name is Brian. I want to thank you very much for your presentation. Man, I guess if this is just a summary for novices, I have a whole new appreciation for all that has to happen when these dreadful decisions have to be made. I do want to ask one question to Rick. Is it Latifov? I don't want to mispronounce your name. When you were talking about, I guess, like the science behind de-escalation, you mentioned weapons that a person might have, including a baseball bat, a knife, and let's say a gun. And I'm wondering if in whatever is required in de-escalation, are those weapons considered equal, right? So would the same efforts go toward a person with a baseball bat, which you could like see coming at you, as with a gun?
A baseball bat is a proximity weapon. A gun is, well, you pull the trigger and those rounds come out very quickly. So proximity is certainly a factor in those instances. I have to refer to how our law is written, and there's a very good phrase in there, and it says totality of circumstances. Just because somebody's armed with a bat doesn't mean that they're an immediate threat to me. So therefore, and this is what's incredible about ICAT is that, and de-escalation training in general, is that the officer has that opportunity to recognize, do I have time and space to slow this situation down? If this person's armed with a bat and they're a whole basketball court away from me, and I have this police cruiser in front of me, let's talk to this person. Let's not gun face him. Let's see what's going on. Now, if somebody's standing next to him, let's say there's a kid and he's certainly behaving in a violent and very animated way, that certainly changes the exigency of the situation. And that, again, referring to those totality of circumstances that Officer Rizzo mentioned earlier. A gun it really changes that dynamic of the situation, because with a gun, it could change so quickly and so instant. It's difficult to compare the two. And again, I would again have to refer to depending on the totality of circumstances. It's a very broad question, and on top of that, the answer is, well, it depends on the situation, depends on other factors in that instance, case by case basis, certainly, maybe, if that makes sense. I hope that answers your question.
It does, and I just want to add one other layer of complication to address. So I'm also thinking about Tamir Rice, who in 2014, I believe in Ohio, he was gunned down and he had a toy gun, right? So what kind of learning is there for recognizing something like a toy gun, which is as an American as a toy, fortunately, unfortunately, as it comes, right? But when you're a little black kid, right, in Ohio. So is there any kind of learning or training for, and some of these guns look really close to the real thing. So I'm wondering what kind of training is there with that? And that's my last question.
If you want, I can
Oh,
take
so
this
go
real
ahead.
quick.
Absolutely.
So real quick, so that some of the ideas that we teach in our de-escalation training, and even just our tactics when responding to someone who's possibly armed with a firearm, is number one, we want to create distance. We want to have as much distance as possible where we can effectively communicate with them and not increase the sense of immediacy to that threat. If I hop out on somebody and I'm 5 feet away with them and they're armed with a firearm, there's that level of immediacy is instant. There has to be action taken now. And the way we like to train it is we like to keep that distance, as much distance as we possibly can, so we can get verbal commands out. We can do it from a safer distance, from to the rear of our cruiser or behind a hard object that's a decent piece of cover. That way we don't have to take that immediate action. And I think, I'm sorry, sir.
Oh, yeah, but like with a toy, that is, if you are far away from a toy gun, like is there any way to assess or to judge, make a judgment call, I guess, for whether or not you're dealing with someone with a gun or someone with someone who's not a threat?
There's really nothing. Actually, Officer Rizzo, did you want to address that? I saw you raise your hand.
Oh, hopefully you guys can hear me. The issue with firearms, and Rick alluded to this, is we train officers to analyze what we call the threshold of immediacy, which is how close in space and time am I to experiencing an immediate threat? An immediate threat is a threat that you have to take some form of action to mitigate. Okay. It could be something as simple as your action is get to cover and make space, or it could be the ultimate action of having to apply deadly force to somebody. The issue with recognition of toy guns, and you actually pointed this out, is there are so many BB guns, toy guns, airsoft guns, replicas, lighters that look like firearms that there is no way for an officer to tell. We make this known, but we don't always just train for the item that is in somebody's hand. We also train to respond to the actions that they're taking with that item. So if that toy gun or real gun is sitting on the table next to them and their hands are not on it, it's a very close to an immediate threat. But the issue is that the speed at which that weapon can be brought into play. So if they're not touching it and they're not complying, I'm sorry, if they are complying, they're not touching this potentially toy weapon or real weapon, then they're giving us time, and time allows us to take reasonable alternatives to applying force. But an actual replica firearm, there is no way for an officer to tell. And in fact, in one of our presentations that we provide to the entry level police officer candidates, we have a bunch of various pictures to show them. It's one is a toy gun, one is a BB gun, one is a live weapon, one is a lighter, one is another toy gun and another toy gun. We literally ask them which one's real, and there's no way for them to tell. It's a consideration that every officer thinks about, and I know on our department, I believe we've actually had an officer involved shooting where it was a BB gun with no BBs in it and no air. It was something that I believe happened in or around Germantown years ago. And I know for a fact that officer isn't like, he did what he had to do because it was being pointed at people. But I'm sure that he's not happy about having had to make that decision. We train for the actions of the person combined with the weapon. That's about the, I see someone typed a question there. Maybe I can answer that. I'm a master taser instructor. I hope I've answered your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I see KD has a hand up. Nate, I have no control over your audio.
I think the next person up.
Christy.
Yes.
This is Christy Daphnis. So I understand about the totality of the situation. I mean, how do you train for like other potential weapons that are not guns and things like knives, or things that are not necessarily an immediate danger unless at close range? And
So
I guess I'm trying to just think through this, especially given the incident earlier this week, and how would your training be applied? Obviously, you can't comment on an open investigation, but how would your training be applied in a situation like that? So whatever you can say about that, it would be appreciated.
So obviously with the situation that just happened, we don't have any information that we've gotten, and obviously it's an active and ongoing investigation. So even if we had any information, we wouldn't be allowed to comment. But the whole idea of the ICAT program is really dealing with people who have those proximity weapons, those weapons that you need to be in a certain distance for them to use. So that's the idea of our de-escalation training, is keeping that distance from them, trying to give them verbal commands, try to get additional resources, and then the use of a barrier in between you and the suspect when it's possible. And it's not possible all the time. If you're in an
Yeah.
open area, you obviously don't have the ability to take cover behind a vehicle or behind a wall or anything like that. So the
Yeah.
idea of our de-escalation program is really to deal with that portion.
Then just one last follow-up on this. Like, I can't recall where things are at the moment with regard to any procedures to call in other mental health professionals, or others that might be able to help with de-escalation who are not members of the police force.
Hey, Christy, it's Captain Satinsky. That is an ongoing thing that involves a lot of moving parts, but it is something we are exploring. But I don't have enough information to provide to the public at this time.
Thank you, Captain.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I can't tell. There was two statements, two things that made me think that I liked what I heard was that was buy-in has to start at the top. And the question, I'm gonna ask all of it before you answer anything, okay? I take it that all the training programs that you all go through is passed by the top or chief of whatever, the chief guy, right? In the program. Also the one that step up and step in. Is it made clear to all officers when they before they are out doing service that there would never be any backlash, even if you have to step up and step in over your superior. The other thing, I noticed when you was going through showing just some of the training aspects, people doing little things. One other, I saw some person had a crowbar in there, and what I considered a crowbar, and handed to the apparently the officer. I kind of went looking at that. It kind of like in my mind set up a kind of a situation with the officer that they might be handing it to him and then hit him, or should that be a situation where they ask them to lay some of these weapons onto the ground before any action is taken? That's all I have to say.
All right. So going back to the first thing with this, the buy-in from the top. When it comes to anything training related, there has to be buy-in from the top, especially when you get into things like de-escalation. When we get into the ICAT thing, the buy-in from the top is there. We have a lot of support from the superiors on the department, from the chief all the way down in this program. So luckily, we're highly supported in that, and obviously we want to expand our availability to get every officer trained in this at some point, or at least give them the opportunity. Step up and step in. Yes, these an officer who steps up and steps in, if they intervene, first off, they are required to by Maryland law. They have to intervene in a situation where they believe that there is an excessive level of force, or once that force is no longer needed. So they are covered legally. When they report it, there can be no retaliation against that officer whatsoever. Now, going to the crowbar, that video was produced by ICAT, and I 100% feel exactly the same way you do. I looked at that and I was like, yes, if you have reached that level of comfort with that person where you don't think that they would hurt you, but I personally would rather just have them place it on the ground and maybe move them away from it. That way there's no potential for anybody to be harmed, or for that situation to take a quick 180 and turn a different direction. Again, that was one of ICAT's videos. It's what they put up. If you're talking about me on the road, I'm going to have that person just place that on the ground and just walk away from it. That way everyone is safe.
Hey guys, this is Captain Reed, and just to reiterate what the team is saying, they're doing a really good job of explaining this. As you can tell, this is like 80 hours of training for officers, and you guys are getting the the waterboarding version of it. But as far as intervening and if an officer is going to get into trouble, we had that in our directive prior to it being Maryland law. Function Code 300 Rule 6 intervention policy is where it is mandated that if an officer sees something, then they interact or they will get in trouble along with the officers around them that refuse to act. And we have never had that. We have seen watching use of force videos where we're all human, right? Somebody can start getting under our skin and an officer will step in and say, hey, I got it, take a break. And we've seen that time and time again. So believe you me, they're not going to get into any trouble. And that comes from Chief Yamada down with their support.
All right, I think we have one more hand up. Mr. Gonzalez? Your microphone, I believe, is muted.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
When you talk about de-escalation training, you talk about all of the many different components that and aspects that need to be considered. But when you conduct a training, what are the specific strategies that you teach the officer to, in his mind, what are the default strategies in his or her mind when they encounter a situation? What is it that you teach them to do specifically?
Specifically, it really, I mean, I don't want to say this just generalized statement, but it is so independently, like for each situation, could be completely different. Ideally, though, it's really communication. Communication is the backbone of any de-escalation strategy. Having the ability to talk to somebody and, if possible, when situations allow, slow things down. Talk to them calmly, slow things down, give yourself enough space from them so you reduce that threat immediacy. So if we interject ourselves a little bit too close, that level of threat increases because they're closer to us. Really, it's everything from getting additional resources there. So if you have somebody on your shift that you know is really good at talking to people, or maybe they have a previous relationship with this person where they've dealt with them in the past and they have that level of trust, we're going to want them to be the person who's in contact with this subject. It's really just a giant strategy using all 7 things to kind of go for a complete package. But the most basic fundamental, the most important thing is that ability to be able to talk to somebody and do it in a way that's reassuring and do it in a way that you're calm. And that's the backbone. I mean, biggest thing is we don't want to lie to people. We don't want to tell them things that aren't true because you lose that level of trust. If you're dealing with somebody who might be going through an episode and they're like, yeah, I want a helicopter and $1 million and I want this and I want to be the next president, whatever it may be, we can't lie to them and say, yes, we're going to make all that happen for you. We have to be very truthful with them. We have to present it in a way that's kind and a way that they can easily understand.
So I'm sorry. So when you mentioned the 7 things, that's a low line, the acronym low line that ICAP teaches? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, the 7 different modules, and they cover different things, but primarily it's just using your ability to communicate something. Then you go into the CDM model. Remember the thing up with our badge in the middle? And really, you start out with you're intaking all of this information, you're processing all the information, you're making a decision based on our policies, our values, our sanctity of life, and our even governmental interest in the situation. You're making that decision, then you're gauging the effectiveness of the decision you made. And if maybe your first time around that circle for that critical decision making model, maybe the outcome wasn't quite what you wanted. So we're going to work that critical decision making model again and see if we have a better outcome the second time around. If we try a different strategy, even having somebody different talk to them, or we change our tactics, or we determine there might be a different governmental interest in dealing with this person. So we work that, and then we the main thing we also do is we work our tactics. We keep that distance. That's one of the biggest takeaways from when I came on 25 years ago. It was you just kind of hop in and get the work done, versus now we're really teaching officers to really slow things down and just keep that distance.
Thank you.
Yes. All right, let me hop over. Just hopping over to the chat and see if there's something that we haven't covered. There was a question about tasers. Joey, I don't know if you want to handle this. It says, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it's my understanding that tasers are less than 50% effective when deployed. Therefore, officers are supposed to have lethal cover to use tasers. And they've heard that the new tasers are much more effective. Will you handle that one?
Yeah, so as I said, I'm a master taser instructor for all the taser platforms. The Taser 7, which is the majority of the tasers that is operational on the road right now, depending on how you classify effectiveness, is around 48% effective. So without giving you an hour-long discussion about how the taser works and everything, we would consider effectiveness where both of the probes from the taser contacted the threat, created neuromuscular incapacitation on some form, and then whatever happens after that is up to the officers. So if we were able to take the person into custody, great. If there was a disconnection from the cables, they got up and fled and we didn't catch them, that too. Both of those situations would be considered effective because the taser did its job. The taser's job is to incapacitate. So if you look at it as, did it create some form of incapacitation? About 48% of deployments cause incapacitation. And this was a statistic directly from Axon. That's with the Taser 7. The Taser 7 only has 2 cartridges, so 2 attempts to create incapacitation. They also have a maximum effective range of 22 feet, which is relatively close. Your average human can cover 21 feet in about 1.5 seconds, which for your officer, that's the average time it takes for someone to perceive a threat and then draw a weapon from their belt, arm it, and actually deploy. So meaning in the time that they would take them to actually perceive, draw, and fire the taser, that person would be immediately right up in their personal space within that 1 arm's length. The Taser 10, which is the taser that the department is going to, and I'm going to toot my own horn here. Nate and I are the reason the department is going to that taser early. We pushed really hard for it. There was an opening in our contract, and Axon has actually worked with the county, and the county agreed. So we're pushing this out a year almost, or maybe a little more than a year earlier than initially planned. The maximum effective range of a Taser 10 is 40 feet. So it's double the range of a Taser 7. It has 10 cartridges, individually fired probes. So you have a lot more attempts to be able to make a connection and generate neuromuscular incapacitation. So I'm going to piggyback and answer 2 other questions. I can't remember your name, but a lady asked a question about how do we train to deal with things that aren't firearms. Well, Sergeant Kunkel spoke about our space, our time, our distance, our tactics. One of the things we also train, because we train to try not to use force, you also have to have options when it is time to use force. So now we have the pepper ball launchers and we have the Taser 10s, which allow longer range, longer distance deployments. We can stay safer. It gives us more of an opportunity to use a reasonable alternative to a higher level of force. So the less lethal devices are a big deal, and getting better and more effective ones is a priority, I think, for any agency in the country right now. It should always be. I I don't have any data yet, any hard numbers on the effectiveness of the Taser 10, but so far we've had three Taser 10 deployments, and all three of them were effective. So right now we're at 100% effectiveness with our deployments. Hopefully it stays that way. It's a great device. Sir, for you to ask the question about the very general question, asking for a very specific answer, I can boil down what we train. We train two types of tactics. There's like communication, interpersonal tactics, and then there are positional tactics. And Nate sort of hit on this, but I want to repeat it so everyone can hear it with a very simple answer. If you ask a question with no details, no situation, it's very hard for us to answer the question because we make all our decisions based on the totality of the circumstances that we're encountering, right? So without any details, the best thing I can say is space, time, and distance is your friend. Intermediate barriers is your friend. Anything you do to slow the situation down buys you time. Time buys you the ability to make a smart decision. So all of our tactics, positionally, physical tactics, are designed to create time so that we can make better decisions. And then you add into that all our communication tactics and all of our training for understanding people that are in crisis and trying to mitigate those issues. They all work together to create the underlying like package of tactics that we teach. When you do things like change the weapons, change the actions, change the number of officers, the number of suspects, the number of injuries, presence of drugs, like I can list factor after factor after factor. Those are going to really then tailor the very specific answer that you want. I hope that makes sense for what I'm trying to say.
Yes, it does. And at the same time, when it's something as complex as and difficult as de-escalation, it seems to me that a framework is even more necessary, a very specific and clear framework that will allow will help the officer deal with the situation and with the many complex variables that you mentioned. It seems to me that's very important, and I don't hear that, and maybe it is in your training.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry. Continue.
No, and so that's my concern, that I can understand that de-escalation in a situation it's a very sensitive, a difficult thing to accomplish. I think officers with experience will develop their own skills, but for the new officer, it seems to me that they need a framework of de-escalation. And I know ICAT has their own framework, what they call low line. And it has, so that's my concern. And I
agree. It is a valid concern, and you are correct. You have to have a strategy, a framework, whatever you want to call it. You have to have if you want to do a sports reference, you have to have an underlying set of plays or rules that will govern what you do. So I would urge you to remember that right now we're on an hour and 45 minutes, just having a discussion about very general, like tip of the iceberg things. The ICAT program, combined with all the 40-hour block of instruction just for understanding use of force, not even really talking about de-escalation, but just when you can use force and the rules that govern that, those are all part of a smaller program. The actual entry-level academy is 6 months long, and all of these things intertwine to provide that. It's almost impossible for us today, right now, to give you the entire framework. But I assure you that the things that we're talking about right now, they are some of the main pillars of that framework. One of the biggest things that will actually reinforce this stuff is to participate in reality-based training. So it's difficult for us to sit here and look at each other on the screen and for me to try to convey an understanding to you, whereas if you could come to the academy, I could put you in 10 to 15 scenarios and you'd have a significant idea of our framework, a better idea, because you actually get to experience it. And we do try to reinforce this stuff with in-service also, not just entry-level recruits. So yes, the new recruits get all this as a major block of instruction, but then in-service students, meaning incumbent officers, they got to come back for 18 hours of training a year, every year. We integrate these things into it everywhere we possibly can. So, but boiling it down, it's space, time, distance, intermediate barrier, cover, concealment, communication, multiple resources, reasonable alternatives to higher levels of force. Try to slow a situation down when you can. The issue is that some people don't allow us to slow the situation down. Their actions when we arrive on scene, there is no other alternative other than force. So
thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Just one thing to add on to that. De-escalation has to be a two-way street. You cannot de-escalate everyone. They have to have that willingness or even ability sometimes to be able to be de-escalated. And that's an important thing to remember as well. If we had a magic wand that we could come out and say, you are de-escalated, it would be fantastic. But the reality of it, you have certain people who cannot be de-escalated, whether it just be because of their mindset or maybe their lack of ability to cognitively be de-escalated. So just something else to think about when we talk about de-escalation. I don't believe I see any more hands up for any additional questions. So I want to thank you guys for your time. Hopefully you guys learned some things and learned kind of like the baseline of how we do our training here. On the screen is our information if you guys want to take a picture. If not, it'll be part of the recording, our information and with email addresses. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any additional questions. If you guys want to do any additional training, we also can do that as well. Okay. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.